bucket at the ready. It's Bjorken on cleanup duty.
G8.
Oh my God!
He stole it.
He stole the Elder Dragon! He's gonna shoot! You're kidding me! Centaurus fights early! Kill number one! Here comes kill number two! And he's in for number three! Number four! The king of Pentago! Oh my God! You gotta be kidding me! You can change the players, but the faith remains! And the faithful shall be rewarded!
All right, gang. Welcome aboard to the third and probably most dreadful episode of the NA Hopium, or I guess what we will call the NA Copium podcast, because, oh man, things are looking not great.
Little rough as of recording this. 100 Thieves have just lost their second game to Gen G. I do not No, C9 and T1 have yet to play today. Currently, I think it's Fnatic EDG, which, oh boy, do I have some thoughts on that game state. I don't know if you caught it, but
I tuned in before we started recording because I was like, at this point, I think the only hope that I have is that Fnatic runs away with it, and then we just try to fight EDG and T1, but we'll get there.
This is about to be a rough game for Fnatic. They just
sure
gave up a double kill to a Sivir.
Oh no, that Sivir is 3-0.
To a Sivir Yuumi. Yep. She's got another kill since I left. Oh dear.
Good.
Yeah, so Sivir Yuumi lane with the Kalista against the Kalista Renata, hoping to, bully that very hard scaling combo. That's going to be a fun one to watch.
Oh, Sven, take notes, because apparently I can't have you play anything that isn't an enchanter. We'll get to that later.
But regardless.
But yep, like always, I'm Hanji, that's Sam, and we're going to do our best to not sound... I mean, I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. It's kind of just looking doomed, but, whatever. We'll make do with what we can. But I'm interested to see, Sam, did you watch Game 1 Fnatic Cloud9?
Of course, yeah.
So what are your takeaways from that game, and how do you think at this point that group will shake out, given that we're kind of nearing the end of the round robin, the first part of the round robin?
I actually, let me just refresh myself real quick, because I just did like a marathon of the sort of NA highlight matches, if you can call them that.
Yeah, the NA highlights.
In order to try and refresh myself, but I think it did the opposite, and it's just made them all blur together in my head now.
It's all one game. I mean, at that point, it might as well be. All of our games look...
Okay, yes. I remember this one. Got it. Yep. Right. So what were we looking to discuss with that one? Sorry.
No. Just your general takeaways from it, and kind of why you think Cloud9 may have not looked their best in that game.
Okay, so I hate to point the big fingers, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry to your boy. Jensen's kind of been getting clapped this world so far, I will not lie. I think overall, like, picking, I'd have to double check with the draft. Did he blind this LeBlanc, or did he counter it into the Azir?
I would think that he took it blind, just knowing how Jensen is and how he thinks that his blind LeBlanc is
he picked it into the Azir. Azir got picked 3.
Lovely.
They banned out Silas Victor, and Jensen answered with LeBlanc. Phew. So I see the idea on paper. But I think, and this is kind of a big running theme that we've seen with a lot of NA teams, especially I think this first day. Did we have 2 LeBlanc picks on day 1 and 2 Fioras? Or was it just 2 Fioras?
I think it was 2 Fioras, and for whatever reason, that's kind of been what I gather is NA's read, is just Fiora top is the best. And...
Right. I mean, I think as a counterpick into something like the Aatrox, it does make sense. And again, there is some merit to the thought, I think. Into something like Aatrox, that's definitely a skill matchup. If you can land some great parries, then you can certainly get some very strong trades, some very strong fights against that Aatrox in the lane. However, and I guess on the flip side as well, into tank matchups, that becomes... Fiora almost weirdly becomes that kind of ticking time bomb scaling pick. Not in a 5v5 sense by any means, just by how that champion works, but, as that matchup goes on, as long as the tanks don't, get a lot of gold injected into them, don't get monstrously ahead into stuff like the Ornn, into stuff like the Maokai, Fiora just becomes a bigger and bigger nuisance for them to deal with in the side lanes. So I think the thought is there on the Fiora pick. I don't know if the performance has necessarily been there. Fudge especially has gone to that pick twice now in both their games, and
the first time it looked okay.
Has
Second
looked fine. I don't want to. I don't want to just completely shit on him. Like I don't think Fudge is like. I don't think Fudge is messing up on that champion necessarily. I don't think like he is making mechanical misplays that are leading to his team getting behind. Unfortunately, I do think Jensen has, like I was saying earlier, he picks the LeBlanc knowingly into the Azir. I can understand the thought. I see it. You want that kind of early game aggressive pick in order to put some pressure on what is this hyperscaler in Azir. The problem I think we quickly found, and the thing that is I think going to make Azir such a staple for this Worlds and such a ridiculous pick, I think some casters have touched on it, is that somehow he feels like both a lane bully and a late game hyper carry.
Yep. That's very God, that was like release Azir for me.
Yeah.
I was so new to the game. Mm-hmm. That's what it felt like to me all the time, where I was like, this thing is so annoying when I'm trying to lane, and now it's just like killing me everywhere I go.
Yeah, and releases here was very funny, but because boy howdy did it take, like people thought he was so garbage for a while because it took so long for people to figure out kind of like how to play him properly, how to think about his abilities, that kind of thing. But obviously here we are now. But yeah, just Jensen on this LeBlanc, he's supposed to be this aggressive pick. He's supposed to be putting pressure on this Azir, but he's not finding the angles. If I remember correctly, he's under a bit of pressure from Razork every now and then, but just consistently dropping further and further behind in farm. By about 10 minutes, he is down about 20 CS to the Azir.
That deficit only grew.
Exactly. Yeah, that matchup did not look better for Jensen at any point. And I mean, to his credit, he did have some decent plays. He had some good chunks. Maybe I can think of one time in particular, he chunked down Razork a bit too well that he kind of baited himself in. And then I believe Hilly and Humanoid showed up and he ended up having to burn his flash to get out. He does live, but like LeBlanc is, she's a mid assassin by very definition. She is one of those champs you have to play on a knife's edge. And while I think, I don't know, compositionally, I look at the C9 comp and I look at how topside, like, you have top mid jungle, you have got Ornn, Maokai, Azir. LeBlanc into the Azir in isolation makes some sense, even if I think Jensen did seem to struggle with that matchup. The problem I think you're quickly going to find is, the classic issue of the LeBlanc. If that LeBlanc is not getting ahead, what on God's green earth is she going to do to Maokai Ornn?
Yeah, and that's exactly what you saw. And so I was listening to Sven, who gave a pretty good interview with Travis, kind of breaking down how they, in complete honesty, got draft gapped. And that's all it was. It was a big draft gap. It looked okay in the early game, like they had a nice, they had a couple kills in the lead, and they had a nice gold lead, but at the end of the day, you're exactly right. What on earth is a LeBlanc, and even a Misfortune to some degree, going to do to a Maokai and to an Ornn?
Yeah,
the answer we very quickly found out was nothing.
Misfortune in this meta does a lot of things very, very well. Tank shredding, unfortunately, is not one of them. We are long gone from the... Am I making this up? I swear to God, there used to be a Black Cleaver Misfortune build. I think that was back when Black Cleaver got like
through a million builds that there had to be.
I feel like that was when Cleaver got like freshly reworked and was so busted that everyone was taking it. But regardless,
yeah, and it just like it really pained me, to go through those replays and then like see Berserker full Misfortune channel on the ulti and do like negative damage.
Yeah, maybe if we're being generous, a fifth to a quarter of either Razork or Wonder's health bar every time. And like, and at the same time as well, like you're picking LeBlanc, you're picking Fiora, you're picking these like early game aggressive champions, and sure that can work well in lane. It kind of didn't in the mid lane's case, but still, looking at the enemy team, sure you can maybe blow up the Azir, sure you can maybe blow up the Aphelios, but Maokai, Renata, you are playing into so many of these good anti-engage tools, and there was a brief moment where we saw how this composition could work. But I will argue that fight was because, and I think you know the one I'm talking about at the bottom of the Dragon Pit, that fight was because of Fnatic losing their coordination, splitting up. That was, I would almost argue that was more on the shoulders of Fnatic sort of getting a little too scattered, losing a little bit too much track of the fight. And all credit to Jensen, and I believe, was it Sven that was diving with him? I don't quite remember, but they did play that fight very, very well. Do not get me wrong.
They punished an overchase, and that's good. You know, you need to be able to punish these overchases at the world level. But if a overchase is the only way you can get back in a game, you've more than already lost.
Absolutely. And I mean, like, you're playing early game aggression into scaling, but at the same time, you are also playing early game aggression into these big beefy front lines that, like, if you have a micro slip up in the early game, it just gets exponentially harder for you.
Yep.
I think the thing we're very quickly seeing, especially with this huge rise to prominence on stuff like the Azir, like the Poppy, which I'm sure you will get to in a moment, Misfortune is starting to feel like a bit more of a rough pick in this group stage, specifically because we are just seeing so, like, how unsafe it can be for a Misfortune to try and channel into a Renata, into an Azir, into a Maokai, into an Ornn. And even then, like we said, Berserker got many full channels off and did next to no damage.
I think it was a good pick while we were still kind of feeling the waters out.
Right.
And that's just how early scrims are going to go, and that's just kind of teams playing the percentage at that point, because the Misfortune percentage was incredibly inflated, going into Worlds. She was winning over 50% of her games at that point.
Right. And I don't want this to come off as me saying there is no place for Misfortune in this Worlds meta. There absolutely still is. Like, I think we saw a lot of strength in the play-in stage, in the play-in groups. We saw the potential that pick has. I think the thing that we are now running into is that teams have been watching the play-ins, presumably, have seen the prominence of that Misfortune, and they have thought up a lot of very good answers. I think the thing with Misfortune is that she is still playable. She is just not the draft skeleton key that she used to be in so many ways, because now teams are thinking of a lot more ways to punish that pick. So she's still serviceable. She's still fine. She's still playable. I think you just have to be very conscious of what the enemy team and your team are drafting around her. She's not that just kind of easy pick with no answers anymore, now that the meta is starting to develop more and more.
Yeah, and I think specifically kind of talking about how we're going into more tank play and more slow play, it just always makes me a little sad to know that the way that NA always tries to function as a region, for better or for worse, is very what's the right term here? Very copycat, I guess. They definitely try to mirror what another region, what other regions are doing, the Koreas and the LPLs, in terms of just, a slower, more controlled play style. And I just don't think that's it, at least so far. I don't know if we have it in us to keep up, and if a game goes late, you just always have to favor other teams.
That's fair, but at the same time, we've seen how these early game aggressive picks have gone for us so far in these groups.
Yep,
on the side of Cloud9, on the side of EG, which, oh, poor EG. I am honestly there with Vulcan, to where I feel like that very first game versus JDG is very winnable, and I do want to give credit to them for getting to that game state, but man.
Yeah, God, that game was rough, because I'm coming off of the emotional sag of losing to Fnatic and quickly realizing, oh man, we might not have it in this group.
Right.
To all of a sudden being like, okay, maybe there's hope in EG, and watching that entire early game play out really well, only for it to all just crumble in a matter of moments.
Absolutely. And sort of getting to that game, I'll need to remind myself of the draft, but the big thing for EG was, like, it was a back and forth game. They were perhaps, I don't remember, were they sort of letting things, they were sort of letting things slip in terms of the kill lead early. But they found some good fights, and crucially, like, they were dragon stacking very well. They got to 3 dragons, I believe, off of the Soul Point dragon They find a really good fight with Impact on the flank. I think Impact actually gets Azir pushed in by Yagao and just says, okay, and starts turning on to this JDG team. Like, there was some promise there, you know, and I think already, like, what we're seeing in this draft, at least I do like this draft out of EG a lot more than what we saw out of the first game in Fnatic, putting Impact on something like the Gangplank that he is so historically comfortable on, getting that carry jungler for Inspired, which it didn't quite work out into the Viego, but I like that they're looking for that early, that they have the confidence for something like that. Already the Victor into the, out of Jojo Pune into the Azir was looking much better, getting Kauri on this, Varus, and having the Tahm Kench for safety for him. Like, I think there's a lot of promise in this draft from EG, and I don't think they are severely outclassed, you know, just on a purely champion standpoint by the draft from JDG. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but they found a lot of early game openings. They got to that early soul point, but I think the big thing that sort of began to fall apart for them, they got to that soul point. It was looking like if they can get that, I think that game is in a very comfortable position for them. And then just 2 fights in a row, first in mid and then posturing around the dragon, their coordination and their positioning on the map, I think, falls apart a little bit, because first Kauri and Vulcan are farming in the mid lane. They've got, I think, Inspired hovering nearby. Like, they've got some coverage, certainly, but they just get Sejuani ulted from over the wall. I believe both Vulcan and Kauri go down, so suddenly they've lost a ton of map pressure in the lead up to that dragon. Regardless, even then, EG is they're able to get to the dragon early. They're able to get the early setup, but Impact, I think the casters called it out. Impact was farming mid with no GP ult ready, with no teleport ready, I think, to my knowledge. So
yeah, there was a very big lack of global pressure, and teams will take advantage very quickly.
And I do really have to wonder. I understand that EG is perhaps thinking, like I think the casters rightly called out, we don't have the GP ult. We need to try to stall this out. We'll just posture. We'll try to prevent them from taking this dragon themselves, but they're posturing in a way to where already I think both the Viego and the Sejuani are in their own blue side jungle on the flank, and I think EG had a lot of promise, and then in that mid to late game, they were just kind of standing in a lot of places they had no business being. They were trying to apply pressure in ways that were very, very punishable for the Sejuani from 369 and the Viego from Kanavi, and just sort of fell apart around it, unfortunately, once those things started snowballing.
Yeah, it's rough when, you know, you play most of the game out correctly, and it's just a few minor mistakes. This is Worlds, man. A few minor mistakes, and you are all but, you know, guaranteed to struggle or lose the game off of 1 or 2 mistakes. And I mean, you saw it with like you were saying with EG. They made a couple of positional mistakes, and that was enough for them to lose what could have been, and I think should have been, a winnable game that would have put them in such a great spot in this group. A win off of JDG, it just almost, you know, skyrockets you to at least having a shot to get out.
Exactly. And you know, I do want to give them credit. Again, like, coming that close against what is absolutely one of the world-class teams, one of the potential favorites to basically take this whole thing. That's, you know, nothing to that's nothing to turn up your nose at. That is solid, and they showed a lot of potential. And then, unfortunately, that G2 game.
Man, dang.
So
there's things you forget, right? You block out, and that's one of them.
So I suppose I don't want to keep jumping us from game to game too quickly. If you have anything, you know, you want to touch on.
There's not much more to add there for the EDG, or sorry, for the JDG game. Just, you know, it looks so close, and it stings that's, you know, that we're still winless, even though it looks like we had a good shot. But yeah, we can jump straight to the unfortunate G2 game.
So EG versus G2. I do want to, you know, make some disclaimers and say, I do think personally there's some promise in this set mid as a counter pick. I really do. Into matchups like the Sylas, into matchups like the Akali, basically into, you know, your kind of typical melee mid assassins or something of the like. I do think there's potentially a lot of merit to the set matchup. And to Jojo Pune's credit, we've already seen him perform quite well on that pick in the series against Mad that got him to this point in the first place. And also, in that early game, he was putting Caps at quite a bit of a CS deficit. He was consistently at least 15 or more CS ahead. He was putting a lot of pressure on Caps. And I think we quickly ran into two problems. One is a gameplay problem, and one is a draft/stylistic problem. So first of all, gameplay, the easy one to point out. Jojo Pune, he has this lead in CS. He's putting a lot of pressure on Caps. He does unfortunately get a little bit too far forward, a little bit too confident with that, ends up giving up a kill over to Caps, I believe, just off of a gank from both Jankos and Targamas, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there was a lot of...
both waiting over the wall. Caps takes the settled, is able to just get at behind him and pull him right in. It's tough to say because Jojo elects to immediately flash right after he gets set ulted from Silas. I do think potentially there is a little bit more potential for him to live if he can find that good set, like an answer set ult, and then use the flash after that. That perhaps is the better play, but again, that's very tough to say. It was such a scrappy, quick thing that happened, and I'm not going to pretend I know that better than Jojo Pune right now. Regardless, he gets a little overzealous. He ends up going down, burns his flash, burns his ult, and already his lead over Caps is functionally gone. And that matchup is only going to get worse for him as time goes on and Caps gets more ahead, unfortunately. But the other thing, the stylistic thing, the draft thing, and I think you could literally, at least to my mind, you could see the moment in the draft that EG struggled with this problem with the set, is that you need something else to fill out your damage profile. You need a source of AP elsewhere. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was impact on the Mordekaiser in the series versus Mad. Maybe I'm wrong, but
no, yeah, he definitely flexed towards the Mordekaiser, and the answer was interesting.
To EG's credit, I do think if you can maneuver your draft to a point where you think it's a set angle and you can get impact on the Mordekaiser, I still think that is potentially a very good combo for them, partially just because Impact is so known for that having that champion in his pocket, for pulling it out at points where he is nowhere near meta and still making it look good. I think that can be a solid compositional switch that EG can pull. However, they already early picked the Maokai because it's been so strong. I don't think that's the incorrect choice, but suddenly they decided to set angle, and then you can almost see the point in the draft where they realize, oh god, what do we draft for AP in the jungle in this meta? And they hover the Lilia first. Honestly, for my money, I do think that would have been a better choice, but they end up going with the Nidalee. And I will not pretend I know enough of Inspired's history to know if he, has some foundation on the Nidalee. It certainly hasn't been super popular in North America in quite a while. I don't think we've really seen it much, if at all. But Nidalee, by her very nature, is, again, kind of the epitome of what I was talking about with that first Cloud9 game, where she is just this hyper early game aggressive pick. She wants to be invading your jungle. She wants to be ganking as much as possible. She wants to be finding those kills and snowballing, because she falls off like an absolute rock if she is not able to do so.
As soon as tanks get 2 or 3 items, those spears do almost nothing.
Right. And what was Inspired able to do with this Nidalee? Unfortunately, the answer mostly seems to be an early dragon, and I think a couple of blue buff quadrant camp steals away from Jankos, and that's about it, unfortunately.
That's not enough for that pick.
Mm-hmm. And I think I do think there is something to say where it definitely felt like he was backed into a corner, and this was the best answer he could come up with at the time. But also, I guess kind of in his defense, where do you gank as Nidalee into this composition? I think honestly the only easy answer is mid. And at that point, Jojo is very likely going to be pushing in Caps' Silas quite often, so that's a bit of a tough angle to begin with, and Silas can certainly be slippery in his own right. But top lane, you've got a Maokai. Okay, easy gank setup. What's he into? Oh, Broken Blade's Fiora. So suddenly that equation becomes significantly harder of can you play around the parry to get enough CC onto the Fiora to lock her down for something like the Spear to hit. Going into bot lane, potentially, but Tom Kench just, I don't know. Nidalee, I feel like in all the metas where we've seen Nidalee thrive, it is because we had things like the Renekton,
Yeah.
like Thresh. We have things in lanes that provide that easy gank setup for her because she has very little gank setup of her own. She has absolutely no CC to her name. She is a ballistic missile of damage. And if she can't land it, then, well, you're going to run into what we unfortunately saw here.
Yeah, the pick was very interesting to me, mainly because, like you're saying, that you just need setup. You're picking it because you want fast tempo, you want fast clears, and then you need to do something proactive after you've cleared your camps in, abysmal, not abysmal, in incredibly fast speeds. It just didn't feel like Inspired had anywhere to go. Like you're saying, sure, they could have tried topside because Twisted Advance is Twisted Advance. But Fiora has a parry, and
I think into almost any other top matchup, that is way more of a doable gank, like way more of a doable, top jungle duo. But into something like the Fiora that just adds those extra variables in, makes the execution so much more difficult. And on a player like Broken Blade, who has done so well mechanical historically on champions like this, that's a tough ask. It really is.
Yeah, and like you're saying, bot side, you could be like, oh, well, why not try bot? Well, Tom Kench doesn't offer the same thing that a Thresh would offer in terms of setup. If you go in too far, Rel is very good at punishing champs once they have jumped in too quick with no way to get out.
Right, she's good at punishing and overcommitting. I guess the same could be
said for her, but
true. Like Rel is both. She's good at potentially punishing overcommits with that tether stun, kind of keeping you guessing on jumping on top of her AD carry, but also, let's say hypothetically, even if Vulcan lands a miracle knockup for a gank setup on, say, the Rel, that if Rel eats, that knockup, sure, that's going to be a pain, but unless Vulcan can instantly stack up the acquired taste to have the Q stun at the ready,
yeah,
what does he have to stop a Rel from just Wing out?
Yep.
From
not much.
From throwing up the dash, throwing up the shield, and then waddling her ass on out of there in her parachute pants. It's just, it's tough. It really is. Maybe once you hit 6, then you have the Chains of Corruption, you have a little bit more follow-up. Like, there is a bit of potential there, but it's tough, because this EG composition, to me, wants to do, I guess, too many different things, because they simultaneously want to put their eggs into the Cowray basket to give him as much safety as possible into things like the Sejuani, into things like the Sylas, and I can understand that, but at the same time, then you've got a bot lane, and you've got a bot lane that is fully indexed towards safety and scaling, and you've got a jungler that just wants to go in the early game. So there's not a lot to do with that. And I think, like, obviously Lilia jungle hasn't been the most popular thing. I don't think we've seen it at all at Worlds, but I do feel like at the very least, we saw some of those counterpicks top lane. I feel like we've seen enough potential on the pick that maybe it could have worked. But again, I don't know Inspired's champ pool. Maybe he's much more practiced on something like the Nidalee. Maybe he doesn't know the Lilia that well. There's a lot of things I could speculate on that I obviously don't know. But we saw how this game ended up turning out, and I think as much as a clever counterpick as the set mid has been for them, it unfortunately, I think we have now found, can also pigeonhole them a little bit if they are not ready to, if they are picking it late and suddenly aren't prepared to conform the rest of their draft around it.
There is a fun parallel, and by fun I mean sad parallel, in the way that game went for EG, in the same way that the EDG game went for Cloud9, where I thought Cloud9 had a better draft. I think they understood that, they're not going to be able to play Berserker like they were playing him in the summer finals. Right. You can't sit them on just, in a ticking time bomb that as soon as they get 2 items or an Infinity Edge, they can just carry the game for you. Their games, at least game 1, they got ahead through Fudge, and then they had nothing to back them up.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see there was adaptations that were made in game 2 to try to kind of put Fudge in that carry position, and have him kind of propel from there. But like you're saying, Jensen just struggled a lot that game.
He got absolutely bullied. And I mean, to be fair, I think this was one of the earlier games in the emergence of the now very popular Azir Poppy combo. We are seeing a lot of teams start to pick up because, Azir, it's tough, obviously, because there are so many big power picks. You want to throw bans at this Worlds, but I feel like we might have to start seeing very quickly, if you are not comfortable into the Azir and or do not have an answer to it, which, have we seen an answer to it work yet?
No.
I mean,
on
Faker's
front,
thought,
I don't think no.
Faker's answer seems to have been the Akali, and I think we both saw how well that went for him yesterday.
But I guess what I was really trying to get at, so Cloud9 had a great chance to get ahead, but mid jungle overstepped big and put themselves in a hole.
Absolutely.
There was a great play that it looked like potentially we were going to be able to get first blood on Cloud's 9 end and maybe even force some more summoners out of mid, really get Jensen ahead, really put Blabber in a position to really just carry that mid game, and it went awry. We gave up 2 kills early to an Azir, and then Jensen just got bullied from then on.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing he could do. His flash was down on an immobile champion. As soon as the ult was back up, Poppy was there to just shove him right into a wall. And it also looked like they kind of had EDG had a really good read that they were going to try to play through Fudge. And, Flandre's answer was, I'm going to play Aatrox. I'm going to shove this Fiora because she has no push against me. And then I'm going to roam. Because the only way that I can lose this lane is if I'm in the lane. So he never was. And he had a lot of presence mid lane. I think he showed up bot side for something. Like, he was just all over the map. And if you're Fudge, you're kind of just a little, I think he could have done a little more. He could have tried to get a little more value out of the Fiora pick at that point, getting some turrets. He didn't do that. And he just kind of let the Aatrox run around the map and really just get everything that they wanted and more out of the Aatrox pick, and it propelled the Azir to beyond impossible status to deal with, and the game just kind of snowballed from one gank that could have led to first blood leading into a double kill, and it just all really, really went downhill from there.
And on the end of Fudge, it's not like he was playing the lane particularly poorly. He was doing fine, but like you said, this Azir got off to a very early snowballing lead thanks to the assistance from Flandre, from JJ. And as soon as you hit that game state, Scout is massive on the Azir. He is only going to get larger as time goes on. You're playing Fiora. You have to deal with that, and they have a Poppy. From my admittedly very brief time in the top lane before I came to hate that role a little bit personally, whoo boy, does that feel bad. Like, you are in this composition where, like, in terms of the early to mid game, it is you. You are going to be a lot of the pressure point on this Fiora until the Victor, the Aphelios can start to scale, can start to be more of those big damage threats in team fights. You are kind of the one that the pressure is on. Your Aatrox is suddenly roaming, the Azir is getting bigger and bigger, and also I do have to, like, absolutely call out something that I don't even think was compositionally, just purely on a player standard. Mako's Thresh was insane that game in terms of his hooks. Like, obviously the flash predict onto Jensen, just so many amazing hooks landing from Mako, making this game so much easier for EDG overall, but also just in a similar vein to Flandre, his map presence. Mako was almost everywhere he needed to be. He was top helping with a dive or helping absorb one. He was bot saving Scout from the second time he gets caught out. C9 burns 2 flashes and he just gets lanterned out. Mako looked so comfortable on this pick, knew exactly where he needed to be throwing those hooks, and just made it so difficult for Cloud9 because, sure, like we said, you have the Aphelios, you have the Victor, you have some of these sort of late game insurance options, but first of all, you're into Azir Jinx, which is arguably almost on equal footing to that in terms of scaling, but with something like the Poppy, like this Thresh just absolutely popping off from Mako, how do you make it work in these team fights? With an Aatrox that is that strong, with a Poppy that can catch you if you get out of position, with an Azir that can catch you if you get out of position, with a Thresh hook that can catch you if you get out of position. You have to play your positioning, you have to play your team fights absolutely perfectly, and unfortunately, we didn't see that.
Yep, and God, it's really a bummer when I love Sven, but he just doesn't look as comfortable as he did in summer when he said oh so famously, support is too easy because all I have to do is push E on my carry and we win the game.
Mm-hmm.
You no longer get to just push E on your carry. Your carry is in constant threat. You constantly have to be trying to make these map moves, make these map plays to try to get your team ahead, or at best protect them when other teams are trying to pick on them. And I saw none of that really happening. Like there was 1 or 2 times where I think we tried to move Sven over topside to assist, but at that point the game's out of control.
Right.
And there's just not much he can do. And there's a bit to be blamed there because I don't think they're playing the lane particularly well bot side. Obviously, if they were, he'd have a little more agency and a little more ability to get out and help around the map. But even then, when you start falling behind, he needs to... I guess anyone in that position just needs to be able to do like what you're saying, like Mako was doing. Always be at the right place at the right time. Because that overstep, that overchase that we saw mid lane that led to the Azir getting huge, it almost would have been okay, but there was a Mako that flashed over the wall and just, flayed Blabber right back into the loving arms of the Azir. And I just need to see a little more understanding of map pressure, because
right.
we have none.
His map presence has certainly been a little less impactful than desired, certainly. I do want to give a little bit of defense to Sven, at least in the case of this game, where he's playing the Kench. Yes, yep. He has the Victor, he has the Aphelios, he's got these big hyper carries, so he is playing the Kench, he is playing to protect them. I think the problem that we very, very quickly saw, especially in the mid game, was, okay, so Jensen gets hooked, or Berserker gets hooked, or gets Azir ulted, or gets Poppy stunned. Sven eats them. Great. Sven now has that hyper carry safe in his mouth. He's ready to carry them out. Except for, here's the problem, is that all of those things that I just listed, that Sven is potentially saving them from, those other 3 things are now ready to lock Sven down or push him back into the enemy team with his carry in tow.
Sorry, sir, we weren't done with your carry. Please come back here.
So many times we saw Sven using the Devour, and then he gets Thresh hooked, he gets Azir ulted, and suddenly the save is kind of just looking like a delay. So compositionally, I do think that is a pretty hard point for Sven to play, especially when they get as far behind as they did. But like you said, his map movements certainly he was not able to keep up with Mako, even, in the case where if he was sticking around bot more while Mako was roaming around, on the flip side of that, they were not able to put much, if any, pressure on that Jinx. Viper was still happily farming away in the bot lane, throwing out these super mega death rockets, which again, even with this sort of hyper rotation style EDG was playing with all these different plays around the map, Viper was always ready with that ult. He had that global at the ready in order to contribute a bit more damage, contribute the kill. And it just feels like EDG had such a clear and concrete game plan with how they played this game, with the composition they picked for themselves. And C9 either wasn't ready for it or was partially just lacking a bit of a plan of their own.
Yeah, no, there definitely was a lot of desperation, very quickly. I think, instead of trying to scale themselves, they were like, nope, this Azir's already going to be too much of a problem. We can't keep up. We need to go for it. And it worked once where, similar to what Fnatic did, EDG did also overstep and we were able to get a couple kills back. But immediately right after that, and I think it was Kobe who said, okay, well, I guess EDG found the line, they drew it, and they're never going to step over that again. And they did just
all right,
that.
That's too far. That's where we don't want to be.
All right, very well. We've learned. We will never do that again. We'll just slowly kill you and take your base and win the game. And that's what ended up happening. It's it's very interesting because Sven continued to kind of mention, and I will continue to mention, kind of how the shift in meta really has, in my opinion, hurt Cloud9 way
Right.
more than what I thought it would. I figured it would be, it would hurt a bit just since Berserkers looked far beyond, every other ADC in the region on the Zeri and on the Sivir. Those champs aren't meta anymore.
No.
And
Well,
the
Sivir's
things-
starting to see a resurgence right now, actually, but pretty much only if you get Yuumi.
Yeah, exactly.
Which,
And
on a side note, why are so many teams giving up Yuumi? Why are we doing that?
I don't know.
No.
You know how I feel about the cat, but
What can I say?
But I really hope that we're able to kind of find what we're missing, try to really put Sven on something that he I don't know how to say this well. On something that he doesn't need to think too much on. It almost feels like
Right. It sounds bad when you say it, but
Yeah.
I understand what you're trying to say, I believe.
Yeah, because right now, if we're trying to keep up with how everyone else is playing, we need to kind of just be able to, get our top side either on a strong counter against the tank or put them on a tank, a scaling pick in the mid lane, a scaling pick in the bot side, and then something to kind of, complement that in the jungle. And I think Blabber has plenty of picks that work in that regard.
Right.
But
And-
I just don't know where Sven slots in. Like, what is the correct champion here for?
Well, in this meta especially, it's very tough because honestly, the only things that immediately come to my mind in terms of what is still seeing play, what is seeing some prominence, are either the Yuumi or the Renata.
Yeah, correct. And I think teams that are drafting against Cloud9 right now know that everything else is essentially a weakness for Sven. And they are going to ban out these enchanters, and you need to be ready for that. I really hope that we are continuing to practice some of these more engage heavy champions. I don't know if he has a Thresh, but I really would love if he had one, because I think Thresh is very much so quickly again rising to elite support status as
Yeah, Thresh is a possibility. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. We see more Maokai in the bot lane still. I still think there is some promise to that pick in the support role, but it's tough.
It's
it
tough.
really is.
I really am trying my best to just believe that there is still an avenue where
Right.
this version of C9 can get out. But given how this meta has developed and what's looking good, it's just harder and harder for me to be able to rationalize. This is coming from a diehard C9 fan. Like, this pains me to say, but I didn't come on this podcast to give people false hope that some way, somehow it's going to happen. I still believe, right? But it's difficult when you look at the first two games.
It's going to be very tough, certainly. And I think in the bot lane, I feel like just overall for NA, I feel like in the support role, perhaps we've been a little behind on some of these picks we've been seeing developing. I mean, I don't think I've seen a single. I think in terms of NA supports, I don't know if any of them have a particular lot of experience on the Rel, which is starting to rise to a lot of prominence. I also don't know if they have a lot of experience playing against the Rel outside of, when she first came out and Core JJ was kind of showing the entire server how it was done.
Yep, he was definitely the Rel father, if you will, the Rel mother.
Absolutely, he was the one that got me to play that pick, to look at it and go, oh, that's what you can do with this. And I mean, we saw it kind of segueing into that first game, 100 Thieves versus Flying Oyster. 100 Thieves was playing, FBI and Hui were playing this sort of tried and true Misfortune Amumu combo that we saw come out so often during the play-in stage, and they were going into Kaiserel. And very early on in the lane, what we immediately saw was Hui bandage tosses onto the Rel, who I believe was actually in unmounted mode at that point, which you see a dismounted Rel. She's moving around at 2 miles per hour. Her shield is probably gone at that point. You think to yourself, hey, this is a pretty vulnerable champion. Maybe we can do something here. Hui bandage tosses in, goes in on the Rel. What do we see immediately happen? Okay, so goes in, hits the rel, bandage toss goes off, glacial augments down, ignites him for good measure. Bing bang boom, rel's dead. But wait a minute, rel comes out of that stun, rel procs her W, flips you over, hits you with the tether stun, and ignites you on her own. All the while, that's 2 stacks of Kai'Sa's passive that she has just built up in a literal instant while you're CC'd that entire time. Like, I think they underestimated so much the potency of this combo in fighting in lane if you give them the easy setup on that CC, and they paid for it. Immediately, Kai'Sa becomes 1-0. She, I believe, continues to snowball that. I believe she was 3-0 by the time that lane phase was over. And all the while, I mean, you know, Shun's chilling. Shun's playing Kai'Sa into a Mumu Misfortune with cleanse at the ready, and it just kind of feels like that bot lane did not have an answer to them.
Yep, no, like I think what we saw as a region in what I'm going to call like play-ins and scrims at this point is not what we are playing on stage.
It does, or at least not what we are playing into.
Yeah, exactly, and that's really interesting. But again, that's just how Worlds goes, right? And we talked about it on the first episode that if you are a step behind, you have all but lost.
Right. These metas,
Yeah.
and it's tough to say that because to some degree, like, there's always going to be those foundation games. You know, it is going to take one team giving this particular pick a chance, or giving this bot lane combo a chance, this top jungle, this top mid duo, whatever it is. You know, as you fucking Kai'Sa Rel, excuse me. You can cut out me cursing if you want, if we want to keep it PG. But things like Poppy Azir, Kai'Sa Rel. You know, we are seeing some of these cheeky combos come into prominence more and more, and to their credit, it is sort of hard to be prepared for it until you see it for the first time and you understand, oh, this is something we need to have on our radar. So to some extent, it is sort of a guessing game of teams are trying out different compositions, trying to innovate, trying to find what style works for us and what things do we have that maybe teams aren't ready for. And I think to their credit, you know, NA, they have sort of stuck to their guns to some extent. JoJo has been feeling the set mid counter pick. We saw a lot of these early game aggressors. We saw a lot of the Fiora from Fudge that we thought these were the picks. And unfortunately, for one reason or another, compositionally, macro-wise, these haven't worked out for us. So now I think the big thing is we are almost through the first half of the round robin at this point. We are almost through the first weekend. Every team within a group has played each other for the most part. So now it is a matter of how well can we adapt? How well can we understand where the metas are shifting, what picks are rising to prominence, what answers we can potentially have to them. That is, I think, going to be the Hopium, for better or worse.
Correct. No, correct. I think before because we're kind of getting close to, I think, what we can call an end segment here. Cloud9's actually about to play, so I think this is a really good time to, you know, start wrapping some things up.
Right. We've barely touched on 100 Thieves.
We don't need to.
I would like to apologize to Thieves and their fans for that, even though I do not make a secret that I am not a super big fan of this team or this org personally.
Yeah, I just don't know if there's too much to, like, yes, we'll talk about them real quick because they are a North American team and they are playing. Right.
And I think, to be fair, go ahead.
I was going to say, my big notes for them is, I don't know, they're playing a style that all of NA is trying to play, and they already were struggling in North America, and it's not looking any better. The game against Gen G, they just got completely outclassed. There was very little, like, obviously, you know, they made attempts. Someday looked great in lane, and by all accounts tried everything in his power to try to carry the mid games against Gen G, and his laners were very far behind, and there wasn't much that he could do on his lonesome. Their game against the Flying Oysters, like you were saying, like, it got to a point where the bot side just completely got, you know, beat, and there was just no hope for them. There's
and on the flip side of that, you know, on the flip side of that, a lot of the problems for 100 Thieves have been themes that we are already touching on, because in that first game, what was Abadage playing? Do you think? Oh, it was the Akali. It was this melee assassin who, you know, to be fair, not exactly as much of like an early game bully as a LeBlanc, but similar fashion to where if you can't carve out that lead for yourself, if you can't find the right skirmishes, the right fights, if you can't start to get ahead, then Akali from behind, LeBlanc from behind, just a lot of assassins from behind in general, that is a pretty feels bad place to be. And Abadage was unfortunately very much feeling it. I mean, he was just eating the Victor lasers left and right, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yep.
Maybe I'm not. But for the most part, the big thing was he came out of lane 0-0-1. He did, find that he did find that one skirmish. He found the assist, but Victor is up at least 18 to 20 CS on him, usually more. And they have a 3-0 Kai'Sa with a Rel to pocket her. And that is a very tough place to be for something like an Akali, and for, hey, would you look at that, some days Fiora.
Yep. Yeah, you're not wrong. Is kind of like what we've touched up on as mistakes for the Evil Geniuses and for Cloud9 is similar to the mistakes that 100 Thieves are making, just in a different group. It's wrong not to bring them up, so we're definitely gonna talk about them. I think some days had really good performances.
Absolutely.
I think Abadaga, kind of similar to Jensen, is just kind of losing every mid matchup.
Right. He's in a position where he's either trying to play aggressive into these hyperscaling picks, into these control mages, and he's just not able to find the angles.
Yep. Or
he's kind of just getting outclassed on the scaling mages, unfortunately. Although I do not. What did he play into Gen G today? I don't quite. remember.
He played the Talia. Yeah,
he sure did.
He went for more of a roaming.
Right, and again, approach. I don't hate that, because I do like that at the very least from NA. What we are seeing from a lot of these teams is they are trying new things. They are trying to find these answers. They are trying different compositional styles, but time and time again, it's just not quite working out yet. So hopefully they can start to find some new answers, some new things that potentially work out better for them in the future. But it's an uphill battle at this point. Yeah. We are on the verge of going 0-9 in the first week. So all the luck in the world to them.
It's, I don't want to say it's by no means over, because I mean, come on, let's not get too.
It's not over until the scores are finished.
And the big note that I really wanted to finish off on is Cloud9's done it before. they have gone down big in the start of a group, and have somehow wrestled their way into an incredible second round, where they found all the wins that they needed. And they got lucky that FPX kind of in that tournament, it was MSI, I believe, right?
Right.
Struggled, and they were able to really reap the rewards of a struggling team. There's no guarantee that there will be perfection from Fnatic. They just lost, I believe. There's no guarantee that this group isn't going to be incredibly volatile. And if that's the case, all they have to do is scrap a couple of wins. Obviously, if they can somehow find a win against T1 today,
so that's a good start, very much so.
Yeah, then the odds definitely become better for you. I don't have much hope for it, but here we are.
Yeah, and I think a point I was making, or at least was trying to make in that very first week when we were sort of in speculation mode, things hadn't quite started out yet, is that Cloud9 as a team regionally this year in this split has been the team that has had the most styles in their playbook, the most different looks they could do, the most different compositions. They were sort of the most flexible and adaptable team in the region, in that, Fudge had the tanks, he had the carries, Jensen obviously has, he's a bit more known for the control mages, certainly, but they had all these players that could play a lot of these different styles. Perhaps we're starting to see that fall apart a little bit, with Sven looking much more rough on things that aren't the enchanters on a lot of these engaged supports, but that at least gives me the most hope out of the NA teams currently, that they do have that potential to adapt, to switch things around, to try a new mode that can maybe bring more success for them. But obviously, only time will tell. They just banned out the Fiora for themselves, so already confirming Fudge not looking to go 0-3 on that pick. Good to see.
Yeah, I was debating in my mind. I was like, do we just do a fun little segment to close it off, or we kind of just analyze the draft? But I'm like, man, that would take a while.
Yeah, I think better to leave it off with the dredges of our hope before it eventually gets dashed. Potentially, we'll be
correct.
Fine. We'll be fine.
Correct. We will end.
Copium.
We will end on a nice high note. Where
I will not say the cursed words in regards to a certain T1 mid laner, but regardless.
It's a fun little tweet that I have, hung on my wall that I always stare at and, cry a little bit.
Yeah, a single tear rolls down your cheek. But regardless, we have been the NA attempting to Hopium, possibly Copiuming podcast.
It's nothing but Copium on this side right now, but who knows? This could be an entirely different podcast next week, or it's going to be more of the same.
I mean, we were looking a bit down on EG early on in the play-ins, and they certainly made a big turnaround. They found a lot of those adaptations. Perhaps that is evidence, as I was saying, that maybe they can make the changes as well, but time will tell. Until that time comes to tell, we'll be here. I can't say same NA time, same NA place, because we are not on a consistent schedule, but we'll be there eventually.
Yeah, we'll show up on your stream at some point. But till then, thanks again for listening. Believe as much as you can, as much as you want. Send them your energy, and we'll see where we're at next week.
And amen, brother. And amen.
This is a Cinema Beats production.